Ethan Blackwood sat in his corner office, overlooking the New York skyline. The glow of the city lights reflected off his cold, emotionless eyes. Love meant nothing to him. It never had. Not after what Vanessa had done. At 33, he was a powerhouse, a self-made billionaire who had doubled his family's wealth, turning Blackwood Enterprises into a global empire. Ruthless in business, detached in personal affairs, and now, he was running out of time. His grandfather, Richard Blackwood, was dying. And with his last breath, he had issued an ultimatum. Marry within 3 months, or lose the company. Ethan clenched his jaw at the thought. Marriage. A waste of time. He had been down that road before, and Vanessa Kingsley had burned him alive. She had walked out on him, left him humiliated and shattered, choosing his biggest rival instead. And now, she was back. But Ethan had no interest in giving her a second chance. He had one goal: find a woman, sign the papers, fulfill his grandfather's wish, and be done with it. Little did he know, his world was about to collide with Scarlett Hayes. Scarlett never meant to spill coffee on the billionaire. She had been rushing between tables, balancing a tray in one hand and holding a notepad in the other. The cafe was packed and customers were impatient. Her manager was already angry, threatening to cut her shift hours. She hadn't even seen him walk in, the man in the tailored Armani suit, radiating power and arrogance. And just like that, with a single misstep, dark, steaming coffee splattered against Ethan Blackwood's chest. The entire cafe fell silent. Scarlett gasped, mortified. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." She stammered, reaching for napkins, her hands shaking. Ethan didn't move. He just sat there, his gaze dark and unreadable. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to demand she be fired. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smirked. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with amusement. Scarlett blinked. "Should I be?" He chuckled. "Interesting." And just like that, Ethan Blackwood saw an opportunity. Later that evening, Scarlett received an unexpected call. A black car picked her up from her tiny apartment and took her to a 5-star penthouse. She sat across from Ethan, feeling out of place in her faded jeans and oversized sweater, while he lounged in effortless perfection. Then, he said something that made her heart stop. "I want you to marry me." Scarlett's lips parted, thinking she must have misheard him. "Excuse me." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "It's simple. A contract marriage. 1 year. No emotions. No strings attached. You play the perfect wife, and I'll pay you $10 million when it's over." Scarlett stared in shock. You're joking, right?" "I don't joke," Ethan replied. "I need a wife to secure my company." "You need money. It's a perfect deal." Scarlett's heart pounded. $10 million. That was enough to save her sick mother, enough to erase her past debts, enough to finally stop running from the shadows of her past. But marriage? To a stranger? She hesitated. Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts, cold, unyielding. "Do we have a deal, Scarlett?" She looked into his eyes, knowing that if she said yes, there would be no turning back. Taking a deep breath, she signed the contract. And just like that, Scarlett Hayes became Mrs. Blackwood. Scarlett sat at the far end of the long dining table in Ethan's grand penthouse, the silence between them louder than words. Their first day as husband and wife had been nothing but business. Ethan barely looked at her, treating her like a shadow in his life rather than a partner. He was always on calls, in meetings, or working late at Blackwood Enterprises. And when he was home, he ignored her. Scarlett knew what she had signed up for, but she hadn't expected this level of indifference. She wasn't a romantic fool, but she also wasn't someone who would be treated like a puppet. One evening, after another silent dinner, she had enough. "Are we going to live like strangers for a whole year?" she asked, breaking the silence. Ethan didn't even glance at her. That was the deal, wasn't it? Scarlett's fists clenched. I didn't sign up to be invisible, Ethan. I won't sit around like a lifeless doll just because you have a personal rule against acknowledging your wife. His silverware clinked against the plate as he put his fork down, finally looking at her. His eyes were sharp, unreadable. I don't care what you do, Scarlett, he said, voice cold. Just don't expect anything from me. Scarlett smirked. Trust me, I don't. Then, with deliberate boldness, she reached across the table and took his glass of wine, sipping from it slowly. Defiantly. For the first time since their marriage, Ethan was caught off guard. She wasn't scared of him. She wasn't weak. And somehow, that irritated and intrigued him at the same time. The business gala was one of the biggest events of the year, filled with New York's richest elite. Scarlett walked in wearing a deep red gown, the silk hugging her curves as if she were born to wear luxury. Ethan, beside her, looked bored and effortlessly handsome in his black tux. Everything was going smoothly, until Vanessa appeared. Ethan, darling, Vanessa purred, approaching them. I almost didn't recognize you with her. Scarlett's blood boiled at the sheer arrogance in her voice. Vanessa turned to her, fake sympathy dripping from her tone. Scarlett, isn't it? How adorable. You must feel so lucky. Tell me, how does it feel to be Ethan's wife for hire? Scarlett smiled sweetly, but her eyes held fire. Not as lucky as you must feel, Vanessa, she said. After all, not everyone gets to live their life regretting the worst mistake they ever made. Vanessa's expression froze. The surrounding guests whispered, some chuckled. Ethan was stunned. He had expected Scarlett to look away, to stay silent, to endure Vanessa's insults like an obedient contract wife. Instead, she had turned the humiliation right back on Vanessa, with grace and intelligence. Scarlett then leaned in, lowering her voice just for Vanessa to hear. By the way, she whispered, if you want Ethan back, you should stop looking so desperate. It's embarrassing. Vanessa flushed red with rage as Scarlett took Ethan's arm and pulled him away, leaving her standing there, humiliated. Ethan let Scarlett lead him across the ballroom, then suddenly stopped. She turned to face him, confused. What? Ethan stared at her, his gaze dark, intense. That was impressive. Scarlett shrugged, playing it cool. I'm full of surprises, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan didn't respond, but something shifted in his expression. Something Scarlett wasn't supposed to notice. He was intrigued. Attraction? No. He wouldn't allow it. This was a contract marriage. And yet, as the night continued, Ethan couldn't stop looking at her. The woman he had underestimated was now the only one who occupied his thoughts. The air in the penthouse had changed. Ethan could feel it. At first, he had dismissed the oddities about Scarlett as simple coincidences. But now, he wasn't so sure. She was supposed to be a poor, struggling waitress, yet she carried herself with the grace of someone who had lived among the elite. She spoke flawless French when they had a dinner with a French investor, a language he never heard her mention before. She understood high-level business jargon, catching things even his top executives missed. And most of all, she disappeared at night. The first time he noticed, it was around midnight. Scarlett had left the penthouse quietly, thinking Ethan was asleep. But Ethan was never asleep when he had suspicions. He watched from the security feed as she slipped out, wearing a hooded coat, blending into the night. Where was she going? And why did it feel like she was hiding something far bigger than he imagined? Ethan clenched his jaw. He needed to find out. The next night, Ethan followed her. Scarlett thought she was careful, but she wasn't careful enough for a man who had grown up in the world of power, deception, and strategy. She walked through the streets of New York taking side routes, avoiding cameras. But Ethan was always one step ahead. His brows furrowed as she entered a rundown hospital on the outskirts of the city. A hospital. His pulse quickened. He moved closer, peering through a cracked window. And his world stopped. Inside the hospital room, Scarlett sat beside an unconscious man, her fingers gently brushing against his pale hand. Her voice was soft, filled with a pain Ethan had never heard before. "I'll fix this, Dad. I promise you. I'll get everything back." "Dad?" Ethan's breath caught. The name on the patient chart hit him like a bullet. Nathaniel Hayes. A name he knew all too well. A name that had once belonged to one of the wealthiest men in America. A name that had vanished from existence over a decade ago. Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. Scarlett Hayes. Not a random poor woman. Not a nobody. She was Nathaniel Hayes' daughter. And Nathaniel Hayes was a man Ethan's own father had destroyed. 12 years ago, Nathaniel Hayes had been a rival to Blackwood Enterprises, a billionaire known for his ruthless intelligence and powerful empire. Then, one scandal changed everything. Overnight, Nathaniel was accused of fraud, stripped of his wealth, and erased from society. Rumors said he fled the country. Others said he died in shame. But the truth? The Blackwood family was behind it. Ethan's own father orchestrated the downfall of Nathaniel Hayes, ensuring no one would ever challenge their empire again. And now, Nathaniel wasn't dead. He was lying in a coma, while his daughter had spent years living in the shadows, plotting to take back everything stolen from them. Ethan stepped back into the shadows as Scarlett's voice hardened. "I did what I had to do, Dad," she whispered. "I married Ethan Blackwood. I got inside his world. And soon, I'll take back everything he stole from us." Ethan's chest tightened. She didn't love him. She had never planned to stay. This was all a revenge plot. She married him for the money, yes, but more than that, she married him to take him down. Ethan felt his breath hitch. The woman he had thought was just a struggling waitress. The woman who had challenged him, stood up to him, and made him feel things he wasn't supposed to feel. Had been his enemy all along. And worst of all, somewhere along the way, he had started falling for her. Ethan sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the dark skyline of New York. His fingers gripped the glass of whiskey in his hand, but he wasn't drinking. He was thinking. Processing. Breaking. Everything he had built his life on, his beliefs, his family's legacy, the empire he had worked so hard to maintain, was built on a lie. Scarlett Hayes. She wasn't just his contract wife. She wasn't just a random poor woman. She was the daughter of the man his family destroyed. And all this time, she had been using him. The memory of her voice in that hospital room echoed in his mind. "I did what I had to do, Dad. I married Ethan Blackwood. I got inside his world. And soon, I'll take back everything he stole from us." Ethan gritted his teeth, his chest tightening. Had she ever cared about him? Even for a second. His thoughts turned to their moments together, her defiance, her sharp wit, the way she challenged him, the way she made him feel something real for the first time in years. Had it all been an act? Or was there something more? That night, he waited for her. When Scarlett walked into the penthouse, her steps were hesitant, as if she could feel the storm waiting for her. She barely had time to remove her coat before Ethan's voice cut through the silence. "How long were you planning to lie to me?" Scarlett froze. She turned to find him standing by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists. For the first time since their marriage, his mask was gone. He looked hurt. Scarlett swallowed hard. "You know, don't you?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "So, it's true." Scarlett's hands trembled. She had prepared for this day, but now that it had come, she felt like she couldn't breathe. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "But I needed more time." "Time for what, Scarlett?" He snapped. To destroy me. To ruin my family. To finish what your father started. She winced at his words, but she didn't deny them. I never wanted to be with you for real, Ethan, she admitted, forcing the words out. The plan was always to leave once the contract ended. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He had suspected it. He had tried to prepare himself for it. But hearing it hurt more than he expected. For the first time in his life, he had allowed himself to care. And she had been waiting for the moment to walk away. Scarlett took a shaky breath, but then her expression hardened. Do you have any idea what your family did to mine? She hissed. My father lost everything because of them. We lost our home, our business, our reputation. And you? You grew up with everything handed to you while we suffered in silence. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Because he knew she was right. Ethan needed answers. He confronted his father the next day, storming into the Blackwood estate like a man on a mission. His father, Charles Blackwood, sat calmly in his study, swirling a glass of brandy. You look troubled, son, he mused. Did you finally realize what kind of woman you married? Ethan slammed his hands down on the desk. Tell me the truth. Charles arched a brow. Which truth? Did you destroy Nathaniel Hayes? His father's expression didn't change. He simply sighed, setting his glass down. I did what needed to be done. Nathaniel was a threat to our empire. If I hadn't ruined him, he would have ruined us. Ethan's hands curled into fists. So it's true. Don't be naive, Ethan. Business isn't about fairness, it's about survival. You think Blackwood Enterprises is the empire it is today because we played fair. You lied to me for years. And what would you have done, Ethan? You were a boy. You would have defended the wrong man, and destroyed yourself in the process. I protected you. I protected us. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had spent his whole life following his father's rules, believing in his vision. But now, he saw the truth. His father wasn't a ruthless businessman. He was a monster. And Ethan had spent his entire life becoming just like him. No. Not anymore. Ethan drove straight to Scarlett. She was already packing her things, ready to disappear forever. He stepped inside, his voice hoarse. Scarlett, don't go. She didn't stop. Why? So I can keep pretending. So I can stay married to a Blackwood. Ethan exhaled sharply. I know the truth now. My father lied to me. He stole everything from your family. And if I could undo it, I would. Scarlett finally turned, eyes filled with disbelief. Ethan took a step closer. I was a fool. I spent my life trusting a man who never deserved it. But you? His voice cracked. You're the only person who ever made me see the truth. Scarlett's throat tightened. Ethan. He dropped to his knees in front of her. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about my company. I care about you. Stay, Scarlett. Not for the deal. Not for revenge. Stay because you want to. Scarlett's heart pounded painfully. For the first time in years, she saw the real Ethan. Not the ruthless businessman. Not the son of a corrupt empire. Just a man, broken, lost, and begging for one last chance. She had spent so long hating him. So long wanting revenge. But now, she wasn't sure if she could walk away anymore. Scarlett stood in the center of the penthouse bedroom, her suitcase open, clothes neatly folded but untouched. She had packed her bags at least 3 times, yet her feet refused to move. She had always planned to leave. That was the deal. But now, everything had changed. The truth about Ethan's father, the lies she had lived with, and most confusing of all, the way Ethan had broken before her very eyes. Scarlett had seen powerful men beg before. They begged for money. For deals. For power. But Ethan Blackwood had begged for her. His words still echoed in her mind. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the business. I just care about you. Scarlett squeezed her eyes shut, her heart pounding. He meant it. She had seen the raw honesty in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. But could she trust him? She had spent years hating him, plotting against him, waiting for the moment she could walk away victorious. Now that moment had come. So why did it feel like she was about to lose? A sharp knock pulled her from her thoughts. Before she could answer, Ethan was already inside. His face was unreadable, his usual confidence replaced with something vulnerable. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Scarlett gripped the handle of her suitcase. That was always the plan, wasn't it? Ethan moved closer, his movements slow, controlled, but his eyes told a different story. Then tell me one thing before you go, he said. She swallowed hard. What? Was it real? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Even for a second, did I mean anything to you? Scarlett's breath caught. Ethan. Just tell me the truth, Scarlett. His voice cracked, his mask shattering. Because I know what it is for me. I know that somewhere between hating you and wanting to prove you wrong, He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Then, in a move that completely broke her, he dropped to his knees before her. I love you, Scarlett. Not because of the contract. Not because of guilt. But because, for the first time in my life, I finally know what love feels like. Scarlett's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Ethan Blackwood, the untouchable billionaire, was on his knees for her. And she had never felt more terrified in her life. I don't deserve you, he whispered. But if you walk out that door, I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I had fought harder. Scarlett's chest ached. Every cell in her body screamed at her to leave, to run, to protect herself from the heartbreak that would surely come. But her heart was already his. And she had been lying to herself this entire time. Damn you, Ethan, she whispered, voice trembling. Then she did the one thing she never thought she would do. She dropped her suitcase. And with a shaky breath, she whispered the words that changed everything. I love you too. The next morning, Ethan made a public announcement. He was stepping down from Blackwood Enterprises. The world exploded with headlines. Billionaire Ethan Blackwood walks away from his empire for love. His father was furious, his board members panicked. But Ethan didn't care. Because for the first time in his life, he had something more valuable than power. He had Scarlett. And she was worth everything. The wedding was small, intimate. No contracts. No business deals. Just them. Scarlett stood before Ethan in a simple white dress, the wind carrying the scent of fresh roses around them. Are you ready? He asked, his fingers brushing against hers. Scarlett smiled softly. I never thought I'd say this, but I can't imagine my life without you. Ethan chuckled, lifting her hand to his lips. Good. Because I'm never letting you go. The officiant smiled. Do you, Ethan Blackwood, take Scarlett Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was deep, certain. And do you, Scarlett Hayes, take Ethan Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband? Scarlett's heart swelled with warmth. I do. The moment their lips met, Ethan knew, he had finally won the only battle that mattered. He had won her heart. And this time, there was no contract to break them apart. Just love. Real, undeniable love.